For 20 years, my stepmother told me my father hated me, that he wanted nothing to do with me. I believed her. But after his funeral, while cleaning out his lonely apartment, I found a hidden box in his closet. It was filled with 2 decades of unsent birthday cards and loving letters, all addressed to me. And I realized in that moment, my father hadn't abandoned me. My stepmother had erased me. Before we open that first letter, I'd love to know, what city are you watching from today? Let me know in the comments, and be sure to subscribe for more new stories every single day. Okay, let's go back to the beginning. My entire life has been defined by a ghost, the ghost of my father's love. He left my mother when I was 8 years old and immediately married Veronica. And from that moment on, he vanished from my life. It was not a slow fade. It was an amputation. Every phone call I made was met with my stepmother's cool, polite, and impenetrable voice on the other end of the line. "Ella, dear," she would say, her voice like smooth, cold marble. "Your father is busy right now. He's building a new life. Can he just call me back?" I would plead, my small, childish voice trembling. "I'll give him the message," she would say. He never called back. I remember the day of my college graduation. I had sent him an invitation, a foolish, hopeful little prayer sent out into the void. I had scanned the crowd during the entire ceremony, my heart leaping at every tall man with dark hair I saw. He wasn't there. That night, after I had celebrated with my mother, I had gone home, my heart a heavy stone in my chest. And I had called him one last time. Veronica had answered, as always. "He's proud of you, of course, but it's difficult for him, Ella. Seeing you, talking to you, it just brings up the past. He's moved on. He has a new family, a new life now. The kindest thing you could do for him and for yourself is to accept that and let him be." And so I had. I had accepted it. I had accepted that my own father did not love me, that my very existence was a source of pain for him. I had built my life around that cold, hard, and empty space where his love was supposed to be. The news of his death came via a short, impersonal text message from Veronica. "Your father has passed away. The funeral is on Saturday." Not a word of comfort, just a statement of fact. The funeral was a surreal, out-of-body experience. It was a large, formal affair filled with his business associates and Veronica's society friends. I sat in the back pew, a stranger at my own father's service. I watched as Veronica, the grieving widow, accepted condolences, her face a perfect mask of tragic sorrow. She gave a beautiful eulogy about their 20 years of blissful, uninterrupted happiness. She spoke of their travels, their friends, their complete family. She never once mentioned my name. I had been written out of his life, and now I was being written out of his death. After the service, she approached me, her face all business. "He kept a small apartment in the city for when he was working late. It needs to be cleared out by the end of the week. I thought," she gave me a look of profound, false sympathy, "that you might want to go and pick out 1 or 2 small things, for sentimental reasons. The key is with the doorman. Just be quick about it. The estate clearers are coming on Monday." It was not an offer of kindness. It was a chore she was delegating, the final, messy, loose end of a life she was now in control of. The next day, I went to his apartment. I had expected a slick, modern bachelor pad, the kind of place a man who had, quote, moved on would live. But the place was sad. It was a small, modest, 1-bedroom apartment filled with old, comfortable, but worn-out furniture. It was the apartment of a man who was not building a new life, but of a man who was profoundly and deeply lonely. And there were no pictures of Veronica, not a single one. There were no signs of a happy new family. There was only one photograph in the entire apartment. It was on his bedside table. A small, faded, silver-framed picture of him and a little girl with missing front teeth and pigtails laughing on a tire swing. A picture of him and me. My grief, which had been so complicated and full of anger, now became a simple, pure, and overwhelming wave of sorrow. I was in his closet, smelling his familiar scent on an old flannel shirt, when my hand brushed against something in the back, behind a stack of old blankets. It was a box, a simple, sturdy shoebox, heavy with unspoken secrets. I pulled it out and sat on the floor, my heart pounding with a strange, inexplicable premonition. I lifted the lid, and my world fell apart. It was not filled with shoes. It was filled with letters, stacks and stacks of them, all bundled together with rubber bands, organized by year. They were all in his familiar, strong, and beautiful handwriting, and they were all addressed to me. I lifted the first one from the top of the bundle, marked with my 10th birthday. I opened the small, brightly colored envelope, my hands trembling. Inside was a birthday card. "My dearest Ella," the card began in his beautiful, looping script. "Happy 10th birthday, my sweet girl. Not a day goes by that I don't think of you and miss your laugh. I hope you have a wonderful day. All my love, forever, Dad." I stared at the loving, beautiful words, my vision blurring with tears. And then I saw it. Stamped across the front of the envelope in a stark, brutal red ink were two words that would change my life forever. Return to sender. I sat on the floor of my father's lonely, silent apartment, the single, decade-old birthday card clutched in my hand. The words "return to sender," stamped in that brutal, impersonal red ink, seemed to mock the loving, heartfelt message written inside. It was a single, irreconcilable contradiction. A loving father, a returned letter. One of them was a lie. With a sense of desperate, almost fearful urgency, I pulled the rest of the contents from the hidden shoebox. It was a time capsule of a stolen childhood, a museum of a love that had been deliberately and methodically intercepted. There were more birthday cards, one for every single year. There were Christmas cards. There was a goofy Happy Halloween card with a cartoon ghost on it. There were postcards from his business trips, the Grand Canyon, the Eiffel Tower, the Great Wall of China, each one with a small, handwritten note. "Wish you were here, my sweet girl. Saw this and thought of you." And then there were the letters, stacks and stacks of them, long, multi-page letters written on his personal stationery. I didn't just read them. I devoured them. I laid them out on the floor around me, creating a timeline, a mosaic of a relationship I had been denied. The early letters were full of a father's simple, profound love. He wrote about my school plays, which he had clearly attended, watching secretly from the back of the auditorium. He wrote about my soccer games, about how proud he was of a goal I had scored, a memory I didn't even know he possessed. He was not an absent father. He had been a secret spectator to my entire life, always on the periphery, always watching, always loving me from a distance he clearly did not want. As the years in the letters progressed, the tone began to shift. The simple love was still there, but it was now laced with a deep, painful confusion. "My dearest Ella," a letter from when I was 16 began. "I don't know why you won't answer my letters or my calls. I know your mother and I divorcing was hard on you, but I had hoped we could still be a part of each other's lives. Did I do something to make you hate me? Whatever it was, I am so, so sorry. I would give anything to fix it. I miss you more than words can say. All my love, Dad." I had to stop reading, a sob catching in my throat. I had never received that letter. I had never received any of his calls. I had spent my 16th year and every year after believing that he was the one who had cut me off. I read on, my hands shaking. I read about his pride when I got into college, his joy when I graduated. He had sent me gifts for each occasion, gifts I had never received, gifts that had presumably been sent back, just like the letters. And then I found the letter that explained everything. It was from just a few years ago. "I tried to talk to Veronica about you again today," he wrote. His handwriting was less steady now, the loops of his letters a little more shaky. "I told her that with my health getting worse, all I want is to see my daughter. She told me, as she always does, that it's for the best that we keep our distance. She said she spoke to you, and that you have a good life now, a life that you have built for yourself, and that seeing me would only bring up old, painful memories. She says you have forgiven me, but that you have moved on and that you don't want or need me in your life anymore. She says it is your wish to be left in peace. I don't know what to believe anymore, Ella, but she is my wife, and she insists she is only protecting us both from more heartache." The air left my lungs. The final, monstrous piece of the puzzle slammed into place. This was not a simple case of a father and daughter drifting apart. This was a deliberate, 2-decade-long campaign of psychological warfare orchestrated by one woman, my stepmother, Veronica. She hadn't just built a wall between us, she had stood on both sides of that wall, whispering lies to each of us, ensuring we would never try to climb it. She had told me he didn't want me, and she had told him that I didn't want him. She had stolen my father from me, and then she had stolen me from my father. She had left us both to grieve for a living person, to ache for a love we both thought was unrequited. The grief I had felt for the father I thought hated me was nothing compared to this new, more terrible grief. The grief for the father who had died believing that his own daughter had rejected him, that she had refused his every attempt at reconciliation, that she had sent back every one of his loving words unopened. And with that grief came a cold, white-hot, and righteous rage. My pain, I realized, was no longer just my own. It was his too, and I was the only one left to fight for him. I sat there on the floor of his lonely apartment, surrounded by the physical proof of his love and her deception, until the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room. I carefully, reverently packed every single letter, every postcard, every return birthday card back into the shoebox. This was not just a collection of memories. This was an arsenal. This was my inheritance. Just as I was about to leave, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. "Hello?" I answered. "Hello, is this Miss Ella Vance?" a man's professional voice asked. "Yes. This is Mr. Davies, from the law firm of Davies and Finch. I was your father, Thomas Vance's attorney, and the executor of his estate. I'm calling to formally schedule the reading of his will for next Friday at our offices." "I see," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. Will Veronica be there?" "Yes, of course," the lawyer said. "As his wife, she is the primary beneficiary." I looked at the heavy shoebox in my lap, the weight of 20 years of my father's stolen words. "Oh, I don't think so," I whispered to myself after I had hung up the phone. I thought of my stepmother, sitting in that office, so confident in her victory, so secure in her decades of lies. I think it's about to get very, very complicated. The week between my discovery in my father's apartment and the scheduled reading of his will was the longest, and yet the shortest, week of my life. I did not go back to my own apartment. I stayed in his, a ghost in my own right, surrounded by the tangible evidence of his stolen love. I slept in his bed, wrapped in a blanket that still held his faint, familiar scent. And I read. I read every single word he had ever written to me. It was a painful, beautiful, and deeply intimate archaeological dig into a life I had been denied. I took the rubber bands off the bundles and laid the letters out on his living room floor, organizing them chronologically, creating a vast, heartbreaking timeline of the last 20 years. I saw my entire life through his eyes. There was a letter celebrating my first place ribbon in the 4th grade science fair, an achievement my own mother had dismissed as nerdy. There was a long, rambling, and hilarious letter from his trip to Italy describing the art he had seen, with a PS that read, "You would love it here, my little artist. One day we will see it together." There was a letter from the week of my high school graduation, filled with a father's profound pride and a deep, aching sadness that he could not be there to see it. "I will be in the back of the crowd. I will not make a scene, but I will be there. I will always be there, watching over you." With every letter I read, my grief for him deepened, but my anger at my stepmother, Veronica, crystallized. It was no longer a hot, chaotic rage. It became a cold, hard, and perfectly clear diamond of purpose. She had not just lied to me, she had, with a cruel and systematic precision, curated my entire emotional reality. She had been the architect of my loneliness, the author of my feelings of rejection. And she had done it all with a polite, serene smile on her face. The turning point, the moment that my grief finally and fully transformed into a strategic plan, came 2 days before the will reading. It was a phone call from Veronica. Her voice was like honey laced with arsenic, full of a cloying false sympathy. "Ella, dear," she began, "I was just calling to see how you are holding up. I know Friday will be a difficult day, and I wanted to prepare you." "Prepare me for what, Veronica?" I asked, my voice a marvel of calm neutrality. "Well, darling," she said with a soft, pitying sigh, "your father, he was a simple man in his final years. His mind was not always clear. He has, of course, taken care of me as his loving wife. The will is very, straightforward. I just don't want you to have any unrealistic expectations. I don't want you to see your hopes get up only to be disappointed." It was a threat, disguised as a kindness. She was telling me in her own coded, cowardly way that I had been left with nothing. She was trying to manage my reaction, to ensure that I would sit there on Friday, accept my pittance, and disappear quietly from her life forever. The old Ella would have crumbled. The old Ella would have believed her, would have been filled with a fresh wave of hurt and rejection. But the old Ella was gone. The new Ella, the woman sitting on the floor surrounded by 2 decades of her father's love, was a different creature entirely. "Thank you for your concern, Veronica," I said, my voice as cold and as smooth as glass. "I assure you, I have no expectations at all." I hung up the phone. The time for passive grief was over. It was time for action. The next morning, I did not take the entire box of letters. I chose my weapons with a curator's care. I chose the first birthday card from my 10th birthday, with its bright red "Return to Sender" stamp. I chose the letter where my father poured his heart out, begging to know why I hated him. I chose the final, damning letter, the one where he wrote that Veronica had told him that I was the one who wanted no contact. I placed these and a few others in my briefcase. I had an appointment, not with my own lawyer, but with his, Mr. Davies. I walked into his grand, intimidating office, the same one my family would be in on Friday. Mr. Davies was a professional, a bit skeptical, but he listened patiently as I laid out my story. When I was finished, I placed the small stack of letters on his desk. "Mr. Davies," I said, "you told me my father's will was straightforward. I believe you, and he were being deceived. This is the truth." He picked up the first letter. He read it. Then he read the next. I watched as his professional, impassive face changed. I saw a flicker of shock, then a dawning comprehension, and finally, a deep, slow-burning anger. He had been my father's friend as well as his lawyer for 30 years. He was now realizing that he had been an unwitting pawn in Veronica's long and cruel con. He went to a large filing cabinet and pulled out my father's thick, official will. He began to read it again, but with new, suspicious eyes. He read for a long time in silence, his finger tracing the dense legal jargon. And then he stopped. He looked up at me, his eyes wide. "My God," he whispered. He turned the document around and pointed to a single, cryptic paragraph on the final page. I thought this was just a strange, sentimental clause he insisted on adding, but now I understand. It's a trap. He read the clause aloud to me. "There is one final condition to all bequests made herein. If, at the time of my death, it is found by my executor that my beloved daughter Ella has been unjustly kept from my life, and if it is found that my wife, Veronica Vance, has deliberately and in bad faith interfered or prevented my attempts at communication with my daughter, then all bequests made to my wife, Veronica Vance, shall be rendered null and void, and the entirety of my estate shall pass to my daughter Ella." I stared at him, my heart pounding. My father had known, or at the very least, he had suspected. He had built a secret legal bomb into the heart of his own will, a bomb that could only be detonated by the very proof of the crime that I now held in my hands. Mr. Davies looked at the letters, then at the will, and then at me, a slow, dangerous, and deeply satisfied smile spreading across his face. "So, here's what we will do," he said, his voice no longer that of a simple executor, but of a co-conspirator. "We will proceed with the reading on Friday, exactly as planned. We will let her believe she has won. We will let her show her true greedy colors." He leaned forward, his eyes glittering. "And at the very end, when she is at the absolute peak of her triumph, you, my dear, will present your evidence." I walked out of that lawyer's office and into the bright afternoon sun, a soldier who had just been handed her orders and the perfect weapon. The will reading was in 2 days. Veronica was expecting to attend a coronation. She had no idea she was about to attend her own execution. The day of the will reading arrived. A gray, overcast Friday that perfectly mirrored the somber, serious mood in my heart. I was not the same heartbroken, confused girl who had discovered that box of letters just a week ago. I was now a woman with a mission, a quiet, focused soldier about to fight a final battle for my father's memory. I arrived at the law office of Davies and Finch not alone, but with my new, formidable ally, Mr. Davies, at my side. I was carrying the shoebox. It was heavy, not just with paper, but with the weight of 2 decades of stolen love. My stepmother, Veronica, was already there, seated in a plush leather armchair in the waiting room. She was the very picture of a grieving but composed, wealthy widow, dressed in an elegant, impeccably tailored black suit. She looked up as we entered, and when she saw me, her expression was one of polite, condescending pity. "Ella, dear," she said, her voice a low, sympathetic murmur. "I'm so glad you could make it. I know how difficult this must be for you." She then looked at the simple, worn shoebox in my arms with a flicker of distaste. "Did you bring something from your father's apartment? A little memento, perhaps? That's sweet." She had no idea that the memento I was carrying was her own death sentence. We were all ushered into the grand, wood-paneled conference room. Veronica took her seat at the head of the long, polished table, a queen about to survey the final accounting of her kingdom. I took a seat opposite her, placing the shoebox gently on the floor beside me. The room was silent, the air thick with a tense, greedy anticipation. Mr. Davies, in his official capacity as the executor, sat at the other end of the table. He cleared his throat and began to read my father, Thomas Vance's, final will and testament. The will was, as Veronica had predicted, very straightforward. He left a few small bequests to old friends, a donation to his favorite charity, and then came the main clause. The entirety of my remaining estate, including all properties, stocks, and liquid assets, I leave to my beloved wife, Veronica Vance, whose love and companionship were the greatest joy of my final years. I watched my stepmother's face as the words were read. She did her best to look humbled, to produce a single perfect grieving tear, but I saw it, a flash of pure, triumphant greed in her eyes, a small, almost imperceptible smirk that touched the corners of her lips. She had won. She had gotten it all. She risked a small, pitying glance in my direction. That, Mr. Davies said, folding the main part of the will, concludes the primary dispositions. He paused, letting the finality of it settle in the room. Veronica was already reaching for her purse, ready to leave, ready to start her new, wealthy life. However, Mr. Davies continued, his voice stopping her cold, there is one final and conditional clause that my client, Mr. Vance, insists be added just a few months ago. I am, of course, legally required to read it. Veronica looked up, her expression now one of impatient annoyance. Really, Julian, she said to Mr. Davies, is this necessary? It's all very straightforward. I'm afraid it is, he said, his eyes meeting mine for a fraction of a second. He then began to read the final secret paragraph my father had written. There is one final condition to all bequests made herein. It is my deepest and most profound regret that I have been estranged from my beloved daughter Ella for most of her adult life. Therefore, if at the time of my death it is found by my executor that my wife, Veronica Vance, has deliberately and in bad faith interfered with or prevented my attempts at communication with my daughter, then all bequests made to my wife, Veronica Vance, shall be rendered null and void. Veronica's reaction was a short, sharp, and utterly dismissive laugh. Well, that's absurd, she scoffed. A sentimental and frankly rather insulting piece of nonsense from a dying man. How on earth could anyone possibly prove such a thing? The room was silent. All eyes were on me. This was my cue. This was the moment my father and Mr. Davies had planned for. I did not speak. I simply bent down, and with a calm, deliberate motion, I lifted the heavy shoebox from the floor and placed it in the center of the polished mahogany table. The sound it made, a solid, definitive thud, was the only sound in the room. "What is that?" Veronica asked, her voice suddenly a little less certain, a flicker of a new, unfamiliar emotion, fear in her eyes. It was Mr. Davies who answered, his voice now a cold, hard instrument of the law. "That, Veronica," he said, "is what we in the legal profession refer to as evidence." He reached for the lid of the box, but I held up a hand, stopping him. This part was mine. I opened the box myself, and I turned it so that Veronica could see the contents. The stacks and stacks of letters, the bundled birthday cards, the postcards from around the world, all in my father's familiar handwriting, all addressed to me. It appears to be 2 decades of my client's attempts at communication. All of them, he reached in and picked up the top envelope, stamped with the same official post office marking, "Return to sender." I watched my stepmother's face as the full, catastrophic weight of what was happening finally crashed down upon her. I watched as the color drained from her cheeks, as her confident, composed facade crumbled into a mask of pure, abject horror. The letters she had so carefully intercepted and sent back for 20 years, the letters she thought were gone, forgotten, turned to dust, they were here. Her crime, her 20-year-long campaign of lies and emotional manipulation was sitting right in front of her, in a simple, damning cardboard shoebox. Mr. Davies looked at her, his expression now that of a judge delivering a final verdict. As the executor of this will, and in light of this overwhelming and frankly heartbreaking evidence of deliberate, sustained, and bad faith interference, I have no choice but to enact the final clause of my client's last testament. "Veronica," he said, his voice cold and final. "Your bequests are hereby rendered null and void. The entirety of the estate, as per the will's own clear and legally binding instruction, now passes to the sole remaining heir, Miss Ella Vance." She just stared at the box, at the ghosts of her own deception, her mouth opening and closing but no sound coming out. She was ruined, utterly and completely. I reached into the box and took out one last letter, the final one my father had written just a month before he died. I slid it across the polished table towards her. She looked at the letter, then at me, her eyes full of hatred that was almost pure. She had stolen my father's words from me for 20 years. Now, his final words were all I was going to leave her with. It was the only inheritance she truly deserved. The silence in the conference room in the wake of Mr. Davies' final, devastating pronouncement was absolute. My stepmother, Veronica, sat frozen in her chair, her face a ghastly, pale mask of utter disbelief. The entire foundation of her life, her wealth, her social standing, the very identity she had so carefully constructed as the beloved, grieving widow, had been obliterated in the space of 3 minutes by a simple cardboard shoebox. She finally found her voice. It was not a sound of remorse. It was a sound of pure, venomous, cornered rage. "You think you've won?" she hissed, her eyes, now 2 burning coals of hatred, locking onto mine. "You think this is a victory?" She gestured dismissively at the box of letters. "You have won nothing. You have a box of empty, sentimental words from a sad, dead man. I had him. For 20 years I had his life, his home, his name. You," she said, her voice dripping with a final, desperate poison, "had nothing." I did not reply. I did not need to. Her words were the pathetic, desperate gasps of a queen who had just been ruthlessly checkmated. I simply stood up, gave a single respectful nod to Mr. Davies, and without another glance at the woman who had stolen my life, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her alone with her empty victory and her now equally empty bank accounts. The fallout was quiet but total. Mr. Davies, as the executor, was legally bound to follow my father's final, brilliant, and legally ironclad wishes. The entirety of the estate was transferred to my name. Veronica was left with nothing but her personal belongings and a single, final, devastating bill from her own lawyers for their services. I heard, months later, through a distant relative, that she had been forced to sell her expensive jewelry and move into a small, rented apartment on the other side of the country, her social circle having abandoned her the moment the story of her monstrous, decades-long deception inevitably leaked out. But my story was not about her. It was about him. I did not sell my father's apartment. I kept it. It became my sanctuary, my library of memories. I spent the next several months not in a lawyer's office, but on the floor of his quiet living room with the box. My vindication was not in the legal documents or the bank transfers. It was in the slow, sacred, and heartbreaking process of finally getting to know my own father. I read every single letter, one by one, in chronological order. I walked with him through the 20 years of my life that had been stolen from us. I felt his pride in the letter he wrote after he had secretly attended my high school play, where he praised my performance as if I were a Broadway star. I felt his worry in the letter he wrote when I was sick with pneumonia in my first year of college, a letter full of detailed instructions for chicken soup and a desperate plea for me to get better. I wept as I read the letter he had written from my wedding, a wedding that he had never been invited to. He wrote about the man I was marrying, a man he had clearly researched, and he offered a father's gentle, hopeful advice. And he had included a check for a staggering amount of money, a wedding gift that, like all the letters, had been stamped "returned to sender" and sent back to him by Veronica. And I discovered that his life had not been the happy, perfect second chapter she had described at his funeral. The letters revealed a profound and deepening loneliness, a man who regretted his own weakness, who was trapped in a cold, loveless marriage, and whose only true, shining light was a daughter he believed wanted nothing to do with him. My revenge was not on Veronica. My revenge was on the lie. And with every letter I read, the lie became weaker, and the truth of my father's love became stronger. Finally, after weeks of reading, I reached the very last letter in the box. It was the one I had slid across the table to Veronica, the one she, in her fury, had left behind. It was dated just 1 week before he died. "My dearest, dearest Ella," it began. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone. And it means that my final, desperate gamble has paid off. I am writing this because I have a terrible feeling that Veronica's control over my life and my connection to you is absolute. I have grown weak, and she has grown strong on my weakness. I have included a final clause in my will. It is a foolish, sentimental thing, and I know she will mock it, but it is my only hope. My hope is that one day you will find these letters, and you will understand the truth, that you will have the strength I never did, the strength to fight for the truth. Do not grieve for the years we lost, my sweet girl. Instead, know this. My life with you, the 8 short years I was allowed to be your father, were the only years of my life that I was truly, completely, and incandescently happy. You were, and always will be, the greatest achievement of my life. I am so proud of you. I have always been so proud of you. All my love, forever and always, Dad." I folded the final letter, the tears now not of sadness, but of a quiet, profound peace. Veronica had been right. She had had his body for 20 years. She had had his house, his name, his money. But she had never had his heart. His heart had always and only been with me. An absolutely heartbreaking and beautiful story about a father's love that transcended even death. What do you think of the father's final, brilliant plan? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you are moved by this incredible story of a daughter reclaiming her past, please show your support by hitting that like button, and be sure to subscribe for more powerful and emotional stories. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.